What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Huskers podcast. We got a big one tonight. We are pumped. We're going to have Mitch Sherman on tonight. We're going to make some sense of the Big Ten West race, the Michigan State game, and also talk a little bit about Maryland. But first, we'll talk a little bit of our sponsors. Of course, we've got Pipeline Jerky. Everybody should be buying Pipeline Jerky at pipeline-jerky.com. A royalty of every bag goes directly back to the Huskers offensive line. We're trying to rebuild the pipeline one bag of jerky at a time. Also, go to huskersstore.com. If we die, we die. We got some really cool Nebraska merch. We're coming out with new stuff every day. Really excited about some of the new lines we got at huskersstore.com. And finally, Land and Lore, men's natural skincare product line from the heart of the nation, made in Omaha, Nebraska. All that sweat and equity takes a toll on you. So probably almost as much as Nebraska losing. We're trying to get rid of wrinkles, fight back against aging, take your skincare and overall well-being back. Go to land-lore.com and use Huskers10 for 10% off your first order at land-lore.com. And now, with that, we'll take you to the show.
Welcome to the Huskers podcast. Oh, yeah.
What's up, Huskers? Welcome to the latest edition of the Huskers podcast. We are pumped for tonight's show. We've got my favorite Husker writer on, Mitch Sherman, joining us. And as we were saying before the show, Mitch has kind of been my Husker therapist over the years. I've read just about everything he's written over the last 10, 12, 13 years. I followed him from ESPN all the way to The Athletic. I like to say he's my therapist because as you guys have followed us over the years for the Huskers, you know that we ride all the highs all the way up and all the way down. A lot of lows over the last 10 years. Mitch is always there for me. He's a steady hand. He always writes really well-reasoned, rational columns where I ride the roller coaster of just pure emotion. So, Mitch, thanks for joining us. I hope you can talk some sense into this season. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. Those kind words. It doesn't always feel well-reasoned and measured when I'm writing those things, especially from the press boxes after some of the games that I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. But I'm glad it comes across to you, Dave, at least like that when you're reading. There's a number of games, including the one Saturday night or Saturday afternoon when it ended in East Lansing that I just felt like, how do I even make sense out of this? But we try to do it every week and then move on to the next game.
Yeah, I have the pleasure, and I kind of have my post-game routine after a loss, which my wife's now figured out is I have to shut my phone off because otherwise I tweet some just horrible things, and it ends up going in like a dark direction. But you can't do that. You got to work through it, which I always like. I can't believe you guys got to do that, and you have to go to the post-game press conference, and you got to stay dialed in. I imagine you treat it as a job, as opposed to a fan, even though you're born and raised in Nebraska, correct?
Right. Yeah, I'm from Omaha and Nebraska grad. I've lived here through all my years, of course, at the Omaha World Herald and then ESPN when I didn't really cover Nebraska too much for 8 seasons. But then in 2019 came back and wanted to do the local stuff again with The Athletic. But yeah, it is a job. And at some point you become desensitized to all of the drama or at least you try to. But that's easier said than done at times. And it's always more enjoyable to cover a winning team. I can say that and still be objective and still be professional and doing my job. But, whether they win or lose, I'm gonna try to make some sense out of it and put it into words.
Yeah. And we'd love, I know, Andrew, I'll pass to you for a sec to kind of take us back. We'd love to start kind of with your career and what you've followed over the years, Mitch. But, I guess my first question, one of the questions I always have for, any writers is as you're in the room itself, as you're in the press room, and how do you remain? Is it stoic in there? Is it quiet as you're watching the games? How do you remain, calm during all the chaos of the game itself?
I wouldn't say it's quiet. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about what's going on, in the game, and if it's a review. I mean, everybody, just like you're in a sports bar or a living room. I mean, people have their opinions. I would say it's less emotional than those kind of settings. We're trying to come at this from, as I said, a professional standpoint, but no, it's not really quiet, except when it gets close to the end of the game. And especially in this internet age where everybody is trying to get something on their computer screen that they can get out right when the game ends. When I left the newspapers and I started covering games for ESPN, there was a short period of time that was almost like early in my newspaper career where you actually got to watch the whole game in the press box. And then the digital world realized that, hey, if we can get some content up on our sites immediately when the game ends, then you hit into a window of opportunity with the fans. And so we've now embraced that at The Athletic too, where in the first couple of seasons that I was back covering Nebraska at this job, we really kind of took our time and we really said our philosophy is going to be the last one to leave the press box. We're going to spend the most time, put the most thought into the pieces that we write. And we still do that, but we also want to have that instant reaction. So if you've noticed this season, when the game ends within 10 minutes, I've got just my first thoughts that are up on the site. And those generally are written during the second half and then go through a real quick editing process as soon as the game's over. In some cases, they can begin to be edited while the game's still going on, but so many of these Nebraska games go down to the last second or the last play. Saturday, as an example, I didn't know who was going to win until that last pass from Heinrich Harburg was batted down. And really, there was a lot of question about it until that drive went off the rails, one or two plays before that. So I'm kind of trying to write something from two different perspectives. Like if Nebraska wins, I've got these, these nuggets here. If they lose, I've got these. So at that point, when that stuff is being put together, the press box, other people are doing the same thing. So at that point, the press box is a pretty quiet place. And if somebody's talking to me, I'm probably tuning them out at that point. But in the first half of games, before the games, after the games, when people are wrapping up, it's very social. And many of these writers, whether they're in broadcasters, whether they cover Nebraska or other schools that were around a lot, we're friends and have plenty to say to each other about football and all kinds of other stuff.
I appreciate that you do take the time to write a well-informed response, because my initial tweet is usually, this is the worst team I've ever seen in my life, or followed by this the best team and we're going to win the Big Ten West. I never know which direction I'm going to go either, but we just fire from the cuff. It's usually bad. That's why I was like, Mitchell, bring me back to earth here, because I am a complete wild card.
To the thumbs. Exclude the brain.
Yeah, with Nebraska football, I think there's something about the way that every season seems to go now that just brings out the highs and the lows. So I think fans of all teams, they ride that roller coaster, but it's been different than the norm for sure with these Huskers for the last several years, because there have been so many more lows than there have been highs. And then when there is a high and something happens that is worth cheering about, it's difficult not to overreact and think that everything is. Well, they had a 3-game winning streak, and it seemed like they had just taken down Miami in the Orange Bowl. But we come back to earth.
Purdue, Miami.
They're going to come back to earth, right? And we saw that this week.
Yeah. So I was kind of building on that. I was looking back through the annals of history of Mitch Sherman history. And so you grew up in Omaha, went to Omaha Burke, then went to Nebraska. But I found it interesting that like your first year of college, you were already covering the team.
Yeah.
And so you just jumped right in. And that was 1993, which was a heck of a year to start journalism on Nebraska football. And you had quite possibly the best 4 or 5 year stretch in history to be a journalist for the team, I guess.
Yeah, right place at the right time as a student. It didn't really leave me with a whole lot of question about what I wanted to do for a career when I got done with that, because I just figured that was how it was. Hey, when you're in college and you do a job, you think that that's how the job's going to be when you get out and into the professional world and the real world. So, I figured I'd be covering national championships for the next 30 or 40 years. Seriously,
if only.
Maybe not that. I think by the time I was 22, I was old enough to figure out that this was a pretty special time in Nebraska football history. But there are things about covering a team like that you take for granted. And some of it is just like the intense interest that the audience has. And, covering a 5-7 team is a lot different than covering a 12-0 team. Just in the sense that you really have to work to keep people's interest. Like I could write anything about a team that's playing for a national championship, and the readership numbers, the engagement is going to be there. It's going to be through the roof. But these recent seasons, really the last 20 years around Nebraska, and again, I haven't been day to day around it the whole time, but for a lot of that time I have. And it causes you to have to do a lot more in the creative way to keep people involved. I mean, writing about things that are far removed from the play calling and the minute by minute, the depth chart, stuff like that. I mean, I have stories that I try to write, if not every week, several times a month, that are about aspects of the team and aspects of the program that you're not necessarily thinking about on Saturday afternoons. And I think those are some of the stories that, people want to hear and people enjoy. They don't know they want to hear them, but when they do hear them and read them, they enjoy them the most. The time that I was in college, that stuff wasn't really necessary because the team was just, it just captured everything about what the fans would want. They lost 3 games in the 5 football seasons that I spent as a student journalist. And, the last one was I was nearing graduation and I was working for the Omaha World Herald in the 97 season, but, I was still an undergrad, and I count that as my time in school. Yeah. 60-3 in those 5 years. And, it ended up with Tom Osborne's retirement season. And, that season had the Missouri game. I was on the field for that at the end. Wow. And, beating Peyton Manning in the Orange Bowl. So, I'm really glad that I was around for that, but it also spoiled me a ton on like thinking I knew what this profession was going to be like.
So starting there, I guess you're a student at the time. It has to be a little hard to contain the emotions. Like, was there ever a time when you just, you're rushing the field, you're celebrating with everybody, you're not a journalist?
I didn't rush the field with a notebook in hand, unless I was trying to get an interview. When I first started in college, there's a pecking order with even though I was covering the football team my freshman year in 1993. I would get assignments from the sports editor, and I think I got to sit in the press box for 1 or 2 games, maybe a couple more than that. Most of the home games, I don't think I went on the road in 93, but then from 94 on I did. But in that first year, it was a transition process. Like I was a student, I was a first year student. I wanted to be able to experience, some of what it was like to be a student, cheering on the team. But then, it wasn't really hard for me once I did step into the press box or, walk into the press conference room in South Stadium on Tuesday afternoons when, Tom Osborne was going to take his seat at the table and answer questions. It wasn't hard for me to flip that switch and, understand that I had a job to do. Maybe, inside, like in my heart, I felt a certain way, but at some point, like that just freezes over and you get a cold, mean heart. And, say that kind of jokingly, but yeah, by the time 94 and 95 came around, it wasn't, I much preferred, I liked it enough that I much preferred to be on the other side, on the side where you weren't yelling and screaming about the games. And maybe it was because it was well, they weren't losing games then, so it wasn't like I experienced the painful side of it.
Yeah.
But I experienced the painful side of it in 93 at the Orange Bowl. I went to that game not to work. I went to the 94 Orange Bowl against Florida State, Charlie Ward, and Trev Alberts and the Byron Bennett game. I sat in the seats at the Orange Bowl in that game. I just turned 19. My dad took me and some buddies. They didn't trust us to fly to Miami and spend a week around New Year's by ourselves on the beach in Fort Lauderdale. So he chaperoned us that year, and we had tickets to the Orange Bowl and sat in the stands. And I will tell you, yes, I sat there and screamed like everybody else.
Yeah.
But the next year came around and I was back at that stadium when they beat Miami, and I was working, and it was a totally different experience. So and since then, that's just all it's been.
I had to feel so good. Yeah, I think one of the things, just like looking back on your career, I mean, you've covered so many different regimes and different types of locker rooms and different types of leadership and everything. I mean, truly, I'm all the way back to the Osborne era. Other than the gap at ESPN there for a little while, which I imagine you're still connected to the program one way or another.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite year, or there's just like a ton of drama one year that was super interesting and invigorating, and just what locker room, I guess, was your favorite that you've covered?
Well, I mean, the most enjoyment I ever got out of the job was when I was in school. And that probably would have been the case whether they were winning championships then or not. I mean, even let's say that you took that championship era from the 90s and you moved it forward 10 years so that it was in my time at the World Herald. I think I still would have enjoyed my job the most when I was getting paid next to nothing and just doing it in college, because, those were my best friends at that time. And we where it truly is a job now, I've got family and, my kids to chase around, and I'm going to have a daughter in college in a couple of years myself. So priorities are completely different. And it's, it's your livelihood. Back then it was just, man, we're living the life. Like we're driving around the Big 12, the Big 8, the first 3 years that I was in college, it was still the Big 8 every weekend. And it wasn't just football. Like me and my buddies were going on the road for Big 8 basketball. And, I remember sitting on the baseline at the Lloyd Noble Center in Norman, Oklahoma, like for a triple overtime game with Danny Neese screaming at Billy Tubbs across the court and just thinking like, man, I'm kind of paying it there. I'm getting paid to do this. I mean, I wasn't getting paid very much, but it was incredible.
That still sounds awesome.
Yeah. So there was nothing that compares to that time, all those years. Like my junior year in 95, everybody knows the 95 football team, and it was, one of the greatest teams in the history of college football. And that was a super interesting year. Well, 94 was a super interesting year to cover, because that's the year that you had all the quarterback injuries with Tommy Frazier and the blood clots. And, I remember being outside the hospital when he was released, and, after, and then the Brooke Behringer story, the first part of his story before the tragic end was incredible to cover. And you had Matt Turman, and Amon Green was a freshman on that team. And I'd watched Amon Green in high school. I kind of got involved quite a bit from the very beginning. Like one way that I carved my niche at the Daily Nebraskan was in covering recruiting. Recruiting was just getting big with the advent of these companies that were the precursor for Rivals and 24/7 and all that. Yeah. At the time, it was more, it was just all their magazines, and they've tracked recruits, and somebody figured out that people were really interested in this stuff and finding out where these players were going to end up going to college. And, I kind of dug into that. And so, when Amon Green was coming out of Central High School as the #1 running back in the country, and Grant Wistrom was coming out of Webb City, Missouri as a 5-star, super prep All-American, I was paying attention to these guys and writing stories about these guys. And, again, it was like, it couldn't have been any more fun. So those seasons, I started to talk about 95, I'm 21 and I'm going to to watch the volleyball team and cover the volleyball team win a national championship that December in Massachusetts at the University of Massachusetts, and then turning around, coming home and driving to Phoenix for the Fiesta Bowl against Florida. So those memories are incredible, and nothing really compares to them. But as far as the stuff from the time that it became a job, I mean, going to the Rose Bowl, I went to a couple Rose Bowls. That was amazing. The Nebraska Rose Bowl was not memorable from the standpoint of the success that Nebraska had, but seeing that Miami team in 01 was something I'll never forget. And then I covered a Rose Bowl in 15 with Stanford and Christian McCaffrey and against Iowa. At ESPN, at ESPN that time, I was kind of canvassing the Big Ten and doing whatever stories in the Big Ten, caught fire as the year went on. And so Iowa was 12-0 that year, going to the Big Ten championship, had a chance to make the college football playoff in its second year. People around the country were screaming that Iowa didn't deserve to be in the championship in the playoff, and they almost were. Lost to Michigan State on a fourth down play at the end of the game, or it would have been Iowa in the CFP, and instead they went to the Rose Bowl and got slaughtered by a great Stanford team. So the Rose Bowl, there's nothing like that environment in college football. The stories that stand out, it's more stories that stand out than it is seasons, I'd say. And the stories, around, sadly, I think for the people who follow the program, sadly, the stories for me that stand out and have been incredible to cover have been all the ones that involve turmoil with this team. And that's just because the way it's been for 20 years. So the transition with Steve Peterson from Frank Solich to Bill Callahan, and then, with Osborne taking over and firing Callahan, and then, the Pelini years had tons of turmoil and even though most of that time I was at ESPN, I would duck into Lincoln and cover some of that stuff just because it was really compelling. Frost had an entirely new set of crazy circumstances, and what was going on a year ago right now. I mean, it's November of 2023, and 1 year ago, like that month of November around Thanksgiving was like exhilarating from my perspective to try to track what was happening every day, because every day it was a new lead and a new rumor and a new coach like that maybe was on the radar of Trev Alberts. So those stories, while they're not like covering national championship teams, they're rewarding in their own way, because it just keeps you on your toes as a reporter.
Yeah, we tracked flights the entire month of November. I kind of miss it. Like, it's been nice. We get to do it every I
don't want to do it again, but it's I got to say it's fun. Like it gets your adrenaline going. Like last year in early November, I mean, it might have, as we're taping this is November 9th, November 7th. Yeah. I don't know what day it is, but there was one day in this first week of November where I was sitting at the airport down, in Epley in Omaha, at the General Aviation, because I'd gotten word through, some contacts that Matt Rule was flying in from Charlotte, and we were tracking planes that were going from Omaha to Charlotte. And, as it turns out, I mean, I had binoculars out there looking through the fence at the it was kind of embarrassing to say, but really just doing your job. I just want to be able to go report, for my readers, like, hey, Matt Rule is here in Lincoln. And we didn't get that until after he got hired on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And then he said that he came in for the Illinois game in October, which was like, oh, we missed that? Like, really? How did we miss that? And then he went with his wife off to Ireland, and then they ended up spending a lot of November in New Jersey. All of this stuff, like, me and my coworker Max Olson wrote about in December of last year. And, it's super interesting now, a year later, just looking back at it and thinking about what was going on at this time, 52 weeks ago.
It's crazy. So I guess on that note too, I mean, it's such good drama. And actually we, our handle takes off whenever there's drama too, which is like, it's the blessing and the curse of it too, is, as it's more stable, I'm like, our followers aren't growing as high. Like, where last year we were like double our follower count just because it was pure chaos. Nobody knew what was going on. But I guess as a writer of the team who follows them closely, and you've followed all of these different transitions from coach to coach to coach, can you tell how well the program is run based on, the access that you have, or like, are you able to say like, okay, this is operationally sound, these guys have it figured out from coach to coach to coach? And if so, how soon can you figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I can walk into the football offices and say, these guys have got their stuff together. But over the course of, months, I think you can get a sense. And sometimes I mean, we can be wrong. I can be like dead wrong about that. But I will say this with this staff right now, and I don't just mean Matt Rule and his 10 assistant coaches. I mean, or 9 assistant coaches, 10 coaches total. I mean, like the whole operation, like 60 people strong. One thing I can tell about them, and this is not necessarily like any kind of a guarantee that they're going to succeed and win conference championships. There's all kinds of other factors that will determine whether that can happen. I mean, the least of which is the Big Ten going to 18 teams and bringing in these 4 Pac-12 heavyweights next year. I mean, that's gonna be as big of a factor as, you know, whether there's like a little bit of dysfunction going on inside Memorial Stadium. But I can see I can see like the organizational operation and how it works. When it's really hard to hide if things are a mess inside a big operation like that. I mean, conversations that I have with anybody around the program, it becomes pretty evident in a hurry whether they know what they know, you know, just how to run something, how to run the system efficiently. And I don't mean like how to call a game or how to make a game plan or how to go out and recruit a linebacker. I just mean like it's so much more than that, that there's so much more than that goes into running a college football program, that all of like the peripheral stuff, I think if there's one thing I've learned in this area, it's kind of how to gauge that, because I've seen, and so have the others who've covered this program for a long time, we've seen so many different forms of that organizational structure. And some coaches have been really good at that through these last 20 years, and others have been really bad at that. And it's a part of it. It's a part of the whole formula that leads to success. You know, great organization doesn't guarantee success, and chaos and dysfunction within the organization, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to fail. But I think it's a pretty big factor. So it leads me to be optimistic about Matt Rule and this group, because they really do have, they're pros in the way that they're going about this. Like, and there's no question about that when you go in the weight room. And I've been in the weight room when guys are coming in and working out and going to visit with Mitch Cholowinski, their sports science guy, and seeing Corey Campbell and, you know, his assistants in there. Or if you go into, other parts of the football office, and I haven't been throughout every part of the football office, but I've had conversations with, the assistant coaches out in the wild, whether they're like at a satellite camp or at the AFCA convention last year, and have met their people who run the hierarchy as they have it right now is they've got a general manager in Sean Padden, and then they've got basically the director of operations in Susan Elza. And like, they've both got their people who are under them, and knowing the two of them as I've gotten to know them a little bit over these last, Susan came on in like February of last year. So you're talking about like 8 or 9 months. I'm just really impressed with the like I said, the organizational structure, and it leads me to be confident that they're going to find answers to a lot of the challenges that they face moving forward. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it's partially a leading question, because I do feel that. I think as fans, you feel that there is, he's on his, Matt Rule's coach, this is now his 4th stop. He seems to know the notes to play, but also he seems to know how to build the program. And, I think a lot of times with Frost, it felt like we were learning together. Like he was learning how to become a head coach and trying to learn as we went, as opposed to having a plan. So I guess I'm glad you feel that too. It's encouraging anytime you have somebody who's actually close to the program.
It sounds like he said we're never going to lose again. Pretty close. I might be reading between the lines, but right, never again. That Michigan State loss was the last one in the history of the program. And
that's
great to know.
Right, and
we're going to quote that.
it leads, like when I say what I said about Rule and the structure of his organization, I mean, I think the people will wonder, well, what did you think of Frost and the way that was run with him? And I mean, it starts at the top, and he was a coach, and he was a play caller, and he wanted to coach. And I don't know how much he Rule is a CEO, and Frost, I don't think he wanted to embrace that part of that part of what it took to be the Nebraska football coach. And his last year, which ended up only lasting 3 games, he had to do it because that was really the only way that he was going to stick around for that 5th season after his conversations with Trev Alberts at the end of 2021. And you could see from, it wasn't Ireland. It was before Ireland. You could see from much earlier in that off season that he was uncomfortable with the role of having to, be more of a CEO. And I felt like by the time they got to Big Ten Media Days in July, like it wasn't a matter of if that thing was going to go belly up, it was when. And I didn't think it would be 3 games into the season, but I thought it would be 5 or 6. And in that sense, again, like the writing was on the wall and it was easy to see, but sometimes with these things, it's a lot more difficult. And, there have been other coaches who came before Frost and Rule where, you thought you had a read on how it was going to go, and it ended up unfolding a different way.
Gosh, that's super interesting. I mean, in that media days, I mean, people will remember he just went up on the podium like he had never done it before.
Yeah, he's no opening statement.
No, he just was like, "What do I do here again?"
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you probably saw that too, Mitch, where we were also, I hand up, I was emotionally invested because he's my favorite player growing up. He was my favorite quarterback for the 90s that I think we all just wanted it to work so bad. So I think that, I don't know, there's so many pros and cons to it where I do think Rule is able to come in more as an outsider. You don't have as much of an emotional connection to him trying to be successful. Right. He's operationally sound. He's playing a CEO role. He's doing all things right. But I do want to ask, and I know I'm going to jump out of order here, Andrew, but I'm so kind of going down this feel route when you're in the press box and, kind of want to dig into this Michigan State a little bit, or at least the season as it's going on. As you're coming into the season, so now we're talking about like the operational side, now we're getting the actual games themselves. Do you know, as you're watching pregame warmups or as you're watching, the first couple plays, so you've seen enough games, do you have a handle of like if we're going to win or not? And this is again a leading question because I feel like in the last handful of games I've seen after like the first drive, I'm like, okay, this team's either going to win or not, right? Like I felt like the goal line stand against Illinois, I was like, okay, we're winning this game. Purdue was like, we're winning this game. That Michigan State first drive, I was like, this is bad. This team is not here. Do you see that because you're on the field or you're in the press box? Can you see it earlier than I see it? Because I feel like I can see it within 3 plays, whether the team's there or not.
I mean, you can always come up with a guess, and I don't think that how the team comes out of the tunnel and plays on the first drive is necessarily all that indicative of the way it's going to go for 60 minutes. Now, you can look at the Illinois game and say, yeah, hey, they had a goal line stand, and that's great, but they also let Illinois drive 80 yards to get to the 1 yard line. So that drive wasn't all. I mean, I'm sure before the goal line stand, if Illinois would have scored on 4th and 1, you probably wouldn't have felt very good about the way that game started. Instead, it's the complete opposite.
No,
and then Nebraska throws a long pass to get out of there, and they're off to the races. And that game, while it wasn't like in the bag the whole way, Nebraska had got the bounces, it got the breaks, it did the little things that it needed to do to win. And that's kind of the opposite of what happened at Michigan State. No, I'm not like some football savant who, can get a read on how the team's going to perform based on the way they look in warmups. And, while the view is different from the press box, because you can see, obviously you can see the whole field. And the importance of that, I think, is like, you can really see body language. You can really see like how quick guys are getting back to the huddle, what they're doing as far as like their interactions with each other on the defensive side after a play. Are they excited? Do they look like they want to be there? What's going on away from the ball? How are things happening on the sidelines? Are players coming back to the sidelines and going and sitting on the bench and hanging their heads? How much are they going up and like talking to their coaches, and not just their coaches, but like, I'm going to have a story later this week about a player on this team who's like a coach on the sidelines. Are they going up to their teammates who are the backups and listening to them? And so I try to watch that stuff, at least in the first half of the game, before I have to bury my head in my computer, unfortunately, and start writing. I mean, fortunately, like that's what we have to do. That's why how I keep my job. But I do like to watch the whole game. That would be nice. And sometimes I feel like I'm only watching the first half, which really stinks when the games are decided in the second half. But sometimes things will happen in the second half of the game, and somebody will say something to me like on Saturday night, and I'm like, yeah, I got to go back. I always have to rewatch the game. I mean, not just the second half, like the whole thing. And I noticed a ton of stuff watching it the second time through that I didn't see in the press box. Even the parts of the game where I thought I was watching close, or I was watching close. It helps to have the replays and the announcers, and they kind of guide you along. And I think one example of that is with all the different calls that went against Nebraska or didn't get reviewed, things like that in the Michigan State game. Like, I watched the Malachi Coleman pass interference call live. I was like, yeah, it's pass interference.
You got hit by a truck.
I saw the face mask against Harburg, but there were other things that happened in that game. I could see the replay on the TV above me, and like I don't have a great view of it. It's not like a 75-inch TV like somebody might have in their basement, where with Tony Blandino or Dean Blandino, talking to him through the replay.
Dean was ready to fight the refs.
Yeah, right. Like I don't have that. I mean, you can listen in the press box, but I also want to be able to have conversations with the other people who were sitting around me too. So I'm not usually listening to the TV broadcast during the game. But you get a different experience watching it on TV. So I think sometimes there's an advantage in being able to get a sense while you're at the stadium on like how the game's going to go before it totally takes shape. And then other times it's the opposite. Like you might have a better sense, based on what the TV broadcast is giving you. So, by and large, I think it evens out. I'd much prefer to watch a game in the stadium any day, but that's just old habit. I think you have an opportunity to see more. And overall, for my job, like being at the stadium before the game is beneficial. A lot of schools allow the media to go on the field before the game, and Nebraska, you can do that, and I always take advantage of that. If it's pouring rain, no, but if it's feasible to go down there and spend 45 minutes during warmups just walking around and listening to conversations and talking to people and stuff like that, then that does it gives you a little bit of sense of what the mood is that day. But there have been plenty of times where I feel like, man, I don't think they're feeling it today. I think I get the sense that this is not going to be a good performance, and they come out and they look great. So
which I'd love to be proven wrong. I've seen it, especially in the last 4 games in particular, where like we're throwing interceptions or we're fumbling on the first play of the game, and it's like if the defense is standing up to them, I'm like, okay, Purdue's not going to gain a single yard. Illinois just has no chance. Northwestern has no chance. But then Michigan State broke through, and I instantly had this like, oh boy, like I just didn't feel good about that game from start to finish. The defense didn't seem to have it. The offense hasn't had it basically all season. It's one of the worst offenses of all time, but at least our defense is elite.
Yeah, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it in East Lansing either. And part of it was probably the first drive, but it was more just like through the first half of watching the defense. I just thought they just didn't quite have the same kind of energy that we'd seen from them during the previous 3 games.
Yeah. So when you are I mean, you have a unique perspective, like taking that time at ESPN and being a senior writer with recruiting and everything.
Mm-hmm.
More of a national perspective there, I guess. But in terms of how do you feel like Nebraska is positioned, and how do you feel like Rule's approach to recruiting has been so far? Like when you watch these games and you say, "Here's what we need," do you feel like we're hitting those needs so far? And if not, what do you see us going after the most in the transfer portal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary time in college football for Nebraska, and it would be even more frightening if like they were 1 year behind where they are now, and you were in this, like if Nebraska was going through, like we talked about that November of 2022, which is one of those memorable months in the program. If that was happening here in 23, like on the verge of this conference shift, I mean, the Big Ten is just going to be a different beast next year and forever moving forward. So at least Nebraska's got this 1 year under its belt where it was able to establish like some kind of an identity within the program, and I think some standards for what this coaching staff and the administration, like what they want. If we were starting at square one, like on December 1st of this year, and then, a few months later, here comes USC, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, I don't know. That would be really hard and it's going to be hard for Nebraska anyway, but it would be monumentally more difficult. So this year's been really valuable for them to just like get their footing. And you look around the league and you see so many teams that are scrambling and, making like, I don't know, maybe they're not rash decisions, but they're like decisions that illustrate the urgency of the situation. Like, I mean, I don't know that Iowa is firing its offensive coordinator. I mean, they've never done it until now. And I realize they've got a new person in a new leader in the athletic director's chair. And this probably wouldn't have happened if Gary Barta hadn't retired, but nonetheless, like they made this decision. And I think it's in some way shaped by the fact that like college football is changing. And if you're not fixing your problems and getting ahead, then you're falling behind. And like the old way of doing things, whether it's at Iowa or Nebraska or, USC isn't necessarily going to work in the world that they're walking into. I mean, it's why, you look around the league and like Northwestern is going through change, presumably. I mean, they're going through change for sure. Whether they have a new coach next year remains to be seen, but Michigan State's going through a wild time. Michigan is going through this craziness with the signal stealing. And, I would expect there's going to be a lot of fallout in the off season. Programs all over the league, are kind of in flux right now. So I feel good about where Nebraska's at because I think Matt Rule has done more than you would normally see from a first year coach. I think he's walked into a situation at Nebraska where he was able to kind of mold his system to the players who were here instead of, trying to like, he didn't start from scratch. He found a way, to strike a balance in using the players that they had with the system that he brought in. And he's been adaptable. He's had to be adaptable with this offense. They've been adaptable with the defensive personnel. He used the portal, but it wasn't like a complete rebuild. So I think, and it remains to be seen. I mean, this team could still win 8 games. They could finish 5-7. And that's a huge difference as far as like what it's going to feel like going into next season, which is why I think this month of November is so incredibly important for the future of the program. Because, if you can get even just to bowl eligibility, but I mean like 7 wins, 8's probably a little overreaching as on the optimism side. But I mean, hey, if they can do it, great. Like that's really going to make a difference in just the way that they are able to walk into, what is a changing era. As for what happens in the off season, I mean, I think they're going to be back in the portal, probably more heavily than what Rule would have said 3 or 4 months ago. I mean, I think this one thing this season's done, obviously on the offensive side, is like expose the needs that they have, and the way that you fill those needs in a short time to kind of keep up with the changing landscape is to go to the portal. And I'm sure it's going to be a huge year for portal entries. just the way that college football has been this year, and like with players all over the country, knowing the opportunities that are going to exist for these major programs that are changing leagues. There's the number. I would guess the numbers this year going into the portal in December are going to be even bigger than what they've been the last couple of years, which is going to entice a team like Nebraska that has holes to fill to go out there and do it through the portal. So I mean, we can talk about specific positions if you want. Like if you want to, they're going to go get a quarterback from the portal.
Well, I want to. Yeah. So the quarterback one is I'd love to get your perspective on, so this one, and this is, I'd love to kind of get, you spoke a little bit about it on your show, the Average Joe Sports Show, which everybody should tune in there, and also subscribe to The Athletic. Shout out The Athletic. I'm so confused by Jeff Sims, to be honest. And I guess it's hard to, you kind of mentioned like maybe he was hurried in the process and he didn't have an opportunity to fully vet Jeff Sims. But he also, you look at his numbers, this guy's got 5,000 plus yards, 30 plus touchdowns at Georgia Tech. He's played football before, and then seemingly shows up here and looks like he's never played football before. And they seemingly have no confidence in him to put him back in the game at all. Do you think he just got overwhelmed by the system? And then I guess that, as a follow on to that, like, I can't quite tell what he's trying to do at the quarterback position if they go to the portal, right? Because they've recruited Kalen, who's kind of more of a drop back passer. They've got, they're playing with Harburg now, maybe just out of necessity. Sims is dual threat. Like, talk about the quarterback as a whole. What happened to Sims, and then what do you think they're going to go do?
With Sims, yeah, I think it was an unfortunate result of the circumstances. And Rule came in and he had to build a staff. He had to build a recruiting class for 23. Had a lot of work to do on that. They had some misses on the coaches that they tried to hire. Not a ton, but there were a couple times where he had to go back to, the drawing board on a coordinator or a quarterback's coach or a receivers coach. And it wasn't probably as smoothly as he would have hoped that process could have gone. I think he ended up with a good staff, but it took him some time, like it does for most coaches. Unless you're, coming into Georgia because Kirby Smart goes to the NFL and then it's probably pretty easy to just like pick and choose the coaches you want, but that's not the situation at Nebraska. So, then objective number, whatever it was, 2 or 3 is like, hey, we got to get a quarterback from the portal. And he's seen Jeff Sims because he's a friend of Jeff Sims' former college coach at Georgia Tech. So he's kept tabs on Jeff Collins' teams, which I find a little strange. That Matt Rule, the coach of the Carolina Panthers, was closely watching Georgia Tech because he had this coaching history with Jeff. There's plenty of guys he had coaching history with, and I don't know that he's watching all their college teams. So I don't know if some of that's just like, some hyperbole, exaggeration, but Rule does watch a ton of football. Like, I don't know where the time in his day allows him to have watched like every single practice from Nebraska last season, including the spring practices. Like, where did he find time to do that?
Well, you got 2x speed now.
Yeah, obviously he watched the games too. So I don't know if he sleeps, but yeah.
I don't like to think that he does sleep. I would like him to not sleep.
Sleep is for the weak. If we die, we die.
Right, but exactly. But if he's got to write these locker room speeches too. So they're all ad-libbed, he says. But
yeah, sure.
But yeah, he clearly relied on Jeff Collins with Sims, and
that is interesting.
I don't know that I'd go back to Jeff Collins for another recommendation if I was Matt Rule, because there were red flags there. That despite those numbers that you read off about Sims at Georgia Tech, there were some red flags there about like some of his, just like his ability to be the kind of leader that Georgia Tech needed. Great athlete, and I'm not saying anything about like his character, but it's like some guys have it and some guys don't. Like some guys, when they walk out on the field, like watch CJ Stroud for the first year in the NFL.
Incredible. Incredible.
And you see him go out there with what, 20 or 30 seconds left on Sunday. And it's just like, he's kind of that guy now where you just know he's going to get it done. And there have been quarterbacks like that, all over the place throughout college and the NFL. That isn't the feel that I get about Jeff Sims and a ton of Nebraska, really all the Nebraska quarterbacks in recent years. But that's not the feel that I think people had about him at Georgia Tech either. So, so I don't know. It was a swing and a miss.
Do you think he'll play the rest of the season?
He's at 4 games. They're not saying that they've had these conversations with him about preserving a year, but it's probably in his mind if he wants to play more college football. I mean, if you see Chuba Purdy come in, if Harburg, loses his helmet, I guess then that you're probably not going to see any more of Jeff Sims. I think whether we see him or not, he's not going to come off the bench and lead Nebraska to a great, offensive, comeback or something like that. I think they have what they have in Heinrich Harburg, and that's what's going to get them to their final win total at this point. So it all changes after this year, though.
I guess if he goes to the portal, and this is, probably I think the single most important position. I'm sure everybody thinks that too. But you look across the league, and all top 10 teams have an elite playmaker. The Jalen Milrose, the Bo Nixes, like across the board, they got. Is that what he's looking for? Or do you think he's looking for more of the, the Kalins
manager?
Yeah.
Well, if you can get the next Michael Penix, like you're gonna get that guy.
Caleb Williams.
You get Caleb Williams, right? Drake May. They're out there. Not that those guys are readily available in the portal, but a lot of these players. Penix came from the portal. Yeah. Bo Nix came from the portal. Caleb Williams came from the portal. More of the great quarterbacks than not end up transferring at some point in their career. And, you got to, as a head coach and as a staff, you've got to find a way to develop an in or have something about your program that stands out to a player like that. And some of it's development too. The Bo Nix that we see at Oregon right now is not the Bo Nix that played at Auburn. That guy was up and down and there's a reason he transferred. It wasn't going well there. And now, he looks like he's going to be in New York next month.
Yep.
So, it's a complicated formula to find. Like if it was easy, everybody would do it, but it's a complicated formula. NIL is of course a factor in that too in today's college football. Yeah. So whatever it is, they got to find a way to do it right, because it's the number one factor that's either going to allow them to get to the next level in a hurry, or that's going to hold them back and prevent progress after, what seems like, again, 3 games that are important in this, what seems like it's going to be a promising first season.
The formula that's going to work is if there's somebody who used to play for Nebraska's kid out there who happens to be a good recruit.
That's it.
I'm holding out hope that he transfers at some point over the next 4 years. Until he graduates, I'm holding out.
Go take your paychecks from
Georgia. So like, are you talking about Joe Burrow or are you talking about Dylan Raiola?
God, all the misses.
Because they're no, they're both one. Obviously, like I when you first said that, I thought it's a joke. That's a joke about Joe Burrow.
Give me that Raiola, baby.
Thing. Right. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know that. I don't know that
the doors never closed.
I don't know that they're ever going to get Dylan Raiola to come out of the transfer portal. But Dominic does have a younger son who's playing JV football at Buford High.
There we go.
Behind his brother. I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. But initially, like I said, Dave, I thought that was a Joe Burrow comment. The son of an ex-Husker who they, could have had out of the portal. All of these, the whole world of former Nebraska football players in their offspring. It leads to some interesting storylines for sure. So
good. All right. Well, Mitch, we're at an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. We really appreciate you coming on. I know it's late. I want to ask you one final question, and on putting you on the spot, how you think the last few games play out, and are we going to Indianapolis?
I'm not gonna go down the road that they're gonna. No, I don't think they're gonna go to Indianapolis. It's probably a good thing in the long run, because whoever does go is going to get sacrificed at the altar of Michigan or Ohio State. But I do think they'll get to bowl eligibility. I think they're going to find a way. None of these three teams left on the schedule are all that scary. I mean, Maryland, I think, has the potential to be a scary team, but it's lost 4 in a row, and losing to Illinois and Northwestern, like, at least should give Nebraska a good sense that it can win that game. Nebraska can win that game. Nebraska can beat Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I mean, Wisconsin being 5-4 is tremendously disappointing for that team and that program and those people in Wisconsin right now. Like, they're not feeling good about their program anywhere close to the same way that Nebraska is feeling about being 5-4 at this very moment. So that's something it's an opportunity that's there for the taking when the Huskers go to Madison, despite not having any success there in their time in the Big Ten. And then Iowa, it's going to just be a race to 10 points, I guess, at Memorial Stadium on Black Friday. So I think they'll get a yard. Yeah, I think they'll get one of those games. I think Nebraska's not going to gain a yard. Yeah, that could happen. But
neither team will gain a yard at all. I think
they'll get there. I think they'll get there to bowl eligibility, and it's a coin flip on, like, if they get to 7 wins. I think it's very possible. So I'll put the over under at 6.5, and I'll tell you after Saturday if I think which way they're going.
Yeah, I'll take that after the last handful of years. But gosh, it's like, I think what's killing us is, it's like, we're so grateful to be at this 5-4, but then you're also like, what a blown opportunity against Michigan State to lose to a team that has lost 6 straight games. Like, it's like right there for us. This is, I mean, the thing that we've been harping on every single week is this is the single worst schedule we've ever played and ever will play ever again. And it's just killing me. Like, next year you got USC, USC and UCLA and all these teams coming in. And it's like, why can't we you can't just beat a Michigan State team without a coach that's lost 6 in a row. Anyway, we'll end on some positive vibes. But Mitch, thanks for coming on. We've got some pipeline jerky headed your way. Just send us your address.
Awesome.
I can't see it right now, but pipeline jerky, we created it. This is our NIL business to help try to build back the offensive line, direct royalty to the offensive line, all 10 players that are on starters or backups on there. So we've got some headed your way as soon as you send us your address, Mitch. But thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's been it's good to chat and good to meet you in person for the first time.
Yeah, that was a fast hour. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. Thanks, Mitch.